Ooh, doggy.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of 100 Yards of Football, the college football edition. Vincent, I got to tell you, I'm starting to get a little nervous because the timeline with 4 games left, some teams have 3, but with the bye weeks kicking in the way that they have, the season is 2/3 over. We've got about a third left to go. And every week, it seems like somebody is reshuffling the deck to see who's going to make it into the top 12 and be in the college playoff. Last week, there were some big games. I was certainly impressed with some of the action that took place. But how about you? I'm very interested to see how the following month is going to turn out here in college football at the NCAA Division I level.
I'm going to say this to all the college football fans, and I'm going to look in the screen here. 64 years old, following this great game of college football. Back in the day, used to have the polls decide who's the best 2 teams that's going to play in the national championship game or even play in a national championship. Only 2 teams. It was a lot of politics back in the 60s, back in the 70s, back in the 80s, back in the 90s. But I'm going to tell you something. I'm just glad that I'm on this face of the earth to see what college football has become. If you cannot get excited over the next month, I don't know about you. You are insane, because the next month, college football is going to be at another level. Can you imagine 12 teams? Can you imagine over 20 teams saying, I deserve to be there? It starts this week, as I call it, elimination. Ole Miss, you on the clock. Back to you, Harper.
Contenders, pretenders, we're going to get to find out. That's not a segment that we have, but you're going to start hearing that even at the college level now. And you mentioned something that's kind of important. I'm Harper LeBel, along with Vincent Turner, our host, and Logan Landers. Logan, you may not remember, Logan's our engineer, the day when the AP and the UPI were the deciders, and teams, if they didn't play each other, they may not even play each other in the Sugar Bowl or the Rose Bowl or in the Fiesta Bowl, the Cotton Bowl. Certainly the big games, the Orange Bowl, I don't want to forget that. Those were the days when you had to sit up from about noon on New Year's Day till a little after midnight, depending on when the Orange Bowl ended. It usually started at 9. But unbelievable how if your team was positioned a little bit higher in the AP, you hated the UPI poll, and vice versa, depending on how it went. But Logan, your thoughts? I mean, being a younger guy, you're a millennial, right? So what do you think about the college 12-team status that is being in the first year of implementation versus what we've done in the past?
So, we've seen for the past couple of years the 4-team playoff, and there's always the teams who said, hey, I should get in. How come I wasn't in above this team? We've seen it year after year after year. We see some good games, obviously, with the playoff implementation, but now that the NCAA has expanded it to 12, like Vince said, we got about a month or so left in the season, the regular season. The first college football playoff rankings just came out yesterday. So now it's starting to feel real. Like you said, contenders or pretenders is what we're going to put the mock title for this one as, I guess. And we'll see what teams can stay strong with a couple of games left in the season and which ones fall off. And most importantly, I'm looking forward to see what kind of upsets we get this late in the season, because they are going to mean more than ever in this 2024 season.
Yeah, and the rankings and how much you beat a team by in terms of the point differential, how well your defense plays, stopping a guy on third down or going for it. All of these, so you're going to see a lot of coaches. Back in the day when Vincent and I were young bucks, a coach would take his hat and throw it down on the ground. Now you got the headphones, you got the iPad, you got all kinds of devices and connectivity and everything like that. It's a much more expensive throw nowadays than it was when you just had your Ohio State Buckeye hat, and Woody Hayes would get mad and throw that. But we'll talk about that more a little bit later. Let's take a look at this week's big games. Let's start locally here in the state of Georgia. You've got the number 2 overall University of Georgia Bulldogs playing in Oxford against Ole Miss. That game is at 3:30 on ABC. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Big game. We're not missing out on anything. We're going to highlight that. It's going to be one of our Super 7. But I'm going to say right now, Georgia's in a great place for a number of different reasons. We'll mention why in just a second. Miami, in their number 4 ranking, ends up on the plains here in Atlanta playing against Georgia Tech. Big implications if Tech beats Miami like they did against Florida State a few years ago on a Saturday night game when they block a field goal late. Things could change dramatically for Tech. So keep your eyes out for that one. Georgia State, losers of 4 in a row, ends up going to James Madison. They'll be in Virginia. That game is at 3:30 on ESPN. The Virginia Military Institute, VMI, will be at Mercer. That's at 1:30 on ESPN Plus here in Georgia. And Tarleton State will be at West Georgia. And Valdosta State, the unbeaten Blazers, will take on Delta State. That's a 3 o'clock game, and that'll be on ESPN Plus. And we obviously want to mention Southern. They have a bye week this week, and they right now are 3-1 in the Sun Belt. They are atop of the Eastern Division in the Sun Belt. So they're going to get to enjoy a couple of days off, if you will, before they go back to work next week. But now let's take a look, if you don't mind. Well, I'm sorry, Vincent, let's ask you, any games in particular before we go to the Super 7? Are there any other highlights that you want to mention, either from last week or going into this week?
Just I'm looking for Georgia State to break their 4-game losing streak under Dale McGee. Started off, if you remember, Georgia State had that big win over Vanderbilt. And now look what Vanderbilt has become on the national level. I know that's a better Georgia State team that's going on the field right now. That's what I'm going to be watching on Saturday. Can Georgia State bounce back and break their losing streak?
I agree. I just relax, guys, but play hard. Stop making silly mistakes, and guess what? A lot of teams can overcome everything else that happens in a ball game. So go Panthers! All right, let's take a look, Logan, at the games that we want to feature this week, and let's just stay with the most important one here in Week 11. Vincent, we're going to start with Georgia taking on Ole Miss, and the thing about this for me is that this will be the first team that Ole Miss will play that's ranked in the top 25. And it'll be the fourth of 5 that Georgia will play. Very comfortable right now playing against very good football teams. Texas, Clemson at the beginning of the year. Georgia has had what I would call a battle-tested schedule. Not every single week, but certainly, in my opinion, Georgia is more prepared for something like this as another ho-hum top 25 game versus Ole Miss taking on a top 25 opponent for the first time.
Elimination. I want everybody to look the definition up on elimination because you got to think about Ole Miss. In the offseason, we was talking about Lane Kiffin is the hottest coach in the country. All the transfer portal players he brought in, I think he had the number 1 transfer portal class, if I recollect. And you look where Ole Miss is at right now. They're 7-2. They had a disappointing loss at LSU a couple of weeks ago. And I'm going to be honest with you, I did not believe that they could beat Arkansas like they did last week, 63-31. So they made a statement on the national level. So with Ole Miss spending all that money on Jackson Dart, who's now one of the top quarterbacks in the country, Walter Nolan, they get their star receiver Trey Harris back. You got to think this is the game that Lane Kiffin needs, not only for him in the rubber stand in the playoff mix, but where he's going to go. Because right now we don't know what Florida's going to do down there in the swamp with Billy Napier. But this is a game, if Ole Miss win this football game, think about all the jobs that's going to come up and how hot Lane Kiffin's name is. And think about how he's going to take that program, Ole Miss, to levels that I've never, ever seen. And you got to think about Archie Manning might be walking back through the door. Bobby Franklin, Charlie Flowers, the 901 Barry Wilburn. Huge football game, the biggest football game in Ole Miss football history. Now to the Dogs. As Harper just mentioned, y'all sitting in a real good position. And I'm going to say this. Georgia hasn't really played outstanding football on the offensive side. Their quarterback, Carson Beck, is struggling. 11 interceptions in the last 4 games? And a lot of people putting heat on him. Maybe because they're saying he's coming to Hollywood, the Lamborghini. But you got to think about this, Georgia, from an offensive standpoint. They haven't really ran the football over the years like the Georgia teams has. And then the receivers have dropped a lot of balls. So I'm wondering, is this the game the Bulldogs put it all together offensively? But they still got the defense that's one of the tops in the country. Jalen Walker, Mikael Williams, Malachi Starks, David Wilson, Dalen Everett. All I'm going to say is this. I'm going to be excited to see him play on Saturday. And Oxford, Mississippi is only 50 miles from Memphis, Tennessee. And I've been on the campus of Oxford several times, even a couple of times for a football game. I like to be there on Saturday because I guarantee you they're going to break attendance records. It's going to be all the way live in Oxford, Mississippi. This is a huge football game, man. Huge football game. The biggest game in Ole Miss football history. You, Logan.
Very well could, Vincent. And when I was looking at both these teams, and as you mentioned, Georgia, they've been playing good football, winners of 4 straight after that insane game, the loss to Alabama, as we know, that we covered weeks and weeks ago. They've came back with a vengeance, won 4 straight. Like you said last week against Florida, in the first half, left you kind of scratching your head a little bit. You're wondering, what the heck is going on with Georgia? They only scored 6 points at halftime as opposed to Florida getting 13. But as we've seen time and time again, Kirby Smart was in the locker room, rallied the troops. Georgia came out and looked like a brand new ball club in that second half, ultimately got the win at the world's largest outdoor cocktail party and scored 14 points in the third and the fourth quarter. Like I said, Carson Beck has been very much, we'll say, a roller coaster this year. A lot of some days he's good. Some days he'll toss some interceptions and just leave you wondering, like, man, why are you throwing that ball in double coverage? So if he has to play better in this game, but let's look back at some positives. You mentioned the running game for Georgia. They finally got it rolling a little bit last week, thanks to Nate Frazier, the freshman running back, 19 carries for 82 yards for the young man. Also got in for 6 points there for a touchdown. So we'll see how that can do. Of course, we know Trevor Etienne went down a little bit. We'll see how that goes. But what I've circled for this game here with Ole Miss and Georgia is I'm looking to see, can the defense for Ole Miss, which has 42 sacks on the season as a unit, can they get that pressure on Carson Beck? Because if we do, we've seen time and time again, if you can get some pressure on Carson, he can crumble sometimes. And where can Ole Miss win this ball game? In the trenches, getting turnovers. So if Ole Miss wants to compete, and as you say, Vince, to keep their season alive and be eligible potentially in that top 12 at the end of the year with just a few games left, must-win game. You got the home crowd behind you. If you want to get a massive win, this is your chance to do so. Ole Miss Rebels, let's see what you got.
You know, I'm interested to see, one, why Vincent was there for non-football related things. It might be a co-ed or two. Or if he just went to the tailgate before, just wanted to hang out and see all the fine people and share in the barbecue that they have down there. I've never, and I know that's one thing I want to do is go to the Grove. It's a bucket list thing to do. I can't imagine it being any less rowdy than its peak of all time. I agree with you, Vincent. I think that this is going to be one of the biggest games in the history of that school. Win or lose, it'll go down as, you know, this was, our attendance was up. People that didn't even want to, couldn't get a ticket to go inside would be hanging around the campus just to see that they were nearby. I got a question for you, though. This is something of interest that I noticed. The only loss that Ole Miss has in conference play is against LSU, and they were ranked 13th at the time. I misspoke a little bit earlier. They do have a opponent in the top 25, and that was LSU. And this is the second one they'll be playing. They've only got one other one left on their schedule. But here's the interesting thing to me. They beat Furman 76-0 at the beginning of the season, Middle Tennessee. They beat Georgia Southern. They beat Wake Forest by a total score of 220-22. Would you still rank them as high as you do, knowing they've lost to LSU and 4 of their biggest wins are against teams that they ended up outscoring by almost 200 points?
Me personally, I think they deserve to be there. I think when you look at, I'm going to go the overall picture, what Lane Kiffin has done since he's been there. He's made Ole Miss relevant. He's put that program to places that I just mentioned Archie Manning didn't have. We talking about Ole Miss football ranked in the top 10, man. We talking about them playing in the college football playoffs. But remember this now, the main reason that I wouldn't have no problem, they went up to South Carolina and dominated. What happened last week in Columbia, South Carolina? Texas A&M, them Aggie dogs wasn't barking. And you saw what happened. South Carolina 44. Texas A&M 20. Ole Miss beat them in Columbia a couple of weeks ago pretty convincing. I don't have no problem where the Rebels at right now. That's just me personally.
Yep. Logan, same question to you. My interest in, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think the mutual activity between two teams have played as they both played Kentucky, and Georgia struggled against Kentucky. That's another thing. But Logan, the Furman, Middle Tennessee, Georgia Southern, and what was the fourth one? Wake Forest. Does that make a difference to you in terms of strength of schedule and having them ranked as high as they are right now at number 16?
So when I look at Ole Miss, and as you mentioned, they beat the brakes off all those teams, and as they should. They're an SEC-led school. They have a high-ranked offense. They're supposed to beat the teams that's on their schedule. And when I look at this game, Harper, they're coming into this game, like I said, 7-2, 2 losses, both by a combined 6 points, 3 points apiece. That's to Kentucky, and that's also to LSU, who, as you mentioned, was ranked number 13 at the time. So in their losses, they're only losing by a field goal. They're not getting beat by a lot. They're not even getting beat by a touchdown. So my thoughts is that if Ole Miss can win this bowl game here against Georgia, well, hey, let's look at the rest of this top 12. What's another team also down south in the SEC that also has 2 losses on their schedule that's currently in the top 12? I heard Roll Tide.
Roll Tide is what I was going to say. Yep.
We'll see. So if Ole Miss can win this game against Georgia, if I'm Alabama, I might be sweating a little bit.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let me give you some facts and figures. Guess who's number 1 in the country, folks, in terms of passing the ball on the collegiate level? That'd be Ole Miss at 377 yards a game. Vincent mentioned Jackson Dart, 71% for him. He's got 3,200 yards already, 21 touchdowns. Yes, I said 21. His quarterback rating is number 6 overall. He's only got 3 interceptions. They get 178 yards a ball game on the ground. They're 45th in the country there. Scoring, 42 points a game. They're 4th in the nation there. Defense, they only give up 13 points a game. They're 6th in the nation there. Ahead of Georgia in every one of those categories. Georgia is at 299 yards in the air. That's 12th nationally. Their Logan mentioned their rushing game. They're 132 yards a ball game ranks them 97th overall. They score 33 points a ball game. That's 33rd overall. They give up 17 points a game. I just mentioned Mississippi only gives up 13 on average. So against different opponents, though, Clemson, Alabama, Texas, and then Mississippi this week, and then Tennessee, Georgia's going to have 5 teams that are in the top 25 that they're going to play at that time. 65% for Carson Beck, 17 touchdowns, 11 picks, and most of those picks are in the last couple of games. 3 wide receivers for Georgia have over 30 receptions. There's Adrian Smith, Dominic Levitt, and Dylan Bell. They have 3 and 4 touchdowns apiece. So it'll be interesting to see how the passing games for each team end up working for this ball game. I think that's going to be the difference maker. Running is going to be important, but I think really the ball game is going to be won through the air. That's just my opinion. Any other final thoughts, Vincent, before we move on?
Elimination game. Lane Kiffin. Ole Miss loses this football game. Adios, amigo. Georgia will really be sitting in a great position.
Yep. And for me, Carson Beck, you got to get back on track. You can't have a 3-interception performance like you did against Florida. You got to look good against Ole Miss because they are hungry.
Yeah, they're a very, very, very good football team, and we're going to find out at 3:30 on ABC. Next game locally, and the Plains here, number 4 Miami. Cam Ward gets to bring it. Vincent, I'm really interested in this one. 9-0 Miami, undefeated obviously in the ACC, takes on 5-4. That game will be at noon on ESPN. Does Haynes King have enough around him between his passing efficiency and his ability to run himself and help out with the running game, obviously for Tech when he gets in trouble? Do they have enough to be able to take on the Hurricanes?
I'm going to say this. Number 4 Miami is coming to town. The Heisman Trophy winner. A lot of people are saying in Cam Ward. He's going to be down there. See what they call it, the flats, right? So he's going to be in the house. Miami can score the football. There's no question about it. But I was listening to another talk show online, and they brought up a very good point. Miami has had 2 calls in 2 games that could have easily went the other way. Will we be talking about Miami? They would have lost them 2 games, one against Virginia Tech and the other against California. And I'm gonna be honest with you. I know the you, Michael Irvin being on the sidelines, but I still don't believe in this football team because I don't think they have a championship defense. Now to Georgia Tech. Haynes King coming back. It's no question about it. When he's under center, Tech is a very good football team. To me, you could start talking about them being a college football playoff team. He's that good. The key for Georgia Tech, what is their strength? They like to run the football. Jamal Haynes. You got your brother coming back, Haynes King. Huge football game for Georgia Tech. They're 5-4. Don't let me down, Tech, because a couple of weeks ago, I took y'all over Notre Dame and you embarrassed me. You made me cry at night, the way y'all took that beating from Notre Dame. To you, Mr. Logan.
Yeah, really, it's just what kind of Georgia Tech we're going to see. Are we going to see the one that is going to pull off upsets, or are we going to see the team that, has lost back-to-back games, lost to Virginia, like you said, didn't really show up against Notre Dame? Really, what version of Tech are we going to see? And obviously, you're going up against a great team in Miami, undefeated on the year, 5-0 also in conference play. But I will say, though, that Miami's defense does worry me a little bit, that they've given up pretty big gains to Duke last week. I get they got the win in that one. They scored 53 points, but you still gave up 31. You gave up 45 to Louisville. You gave up 38 to California, 34 to Virginia Tech. So I'm not worried about the Miami offense. The Miami offense led by, as you said, potential Heisman winner Cam Ward. I'm not worried about that. I think the offense is going to roll for Miami like it's done for 9 weeks so far. And that's why they're undefeated. That's why they're a top 5 team in this nation. But to me, if Georgia Tech gets a little bit of sauce, like you said, they're at home. They got the home crowd behind them. Fans are going to get some varsity before the game. They're going to be excited, and they're going to say, all right, we got the U coming in. Always a good matchup whenever they come to Georgia. Always an electric crowd. But I think Miami will take care of business in this one. I think that their offense just too high powered for Georgia Tech. I think Georgia Tech will get a nice punch or two in the early going, but I think overall Miami is a very talented team. But I will say, Vincent, I will say Harper, Georgia Tech's pulled off some upsets this year. It wouldn't surprise me a whole lot, but it would have shocked a lot of people if they got this one. So I'll go with the U in this one.
Well, there's a couple things that disappoint me. One of them is that Vincent cries so easily when Georgia Tech disappoints him against Notre Dame. The other is Vincent spends a lot of time listening to other people's radio shows instead of our own. So we're going to get over that. I got to not be hurt by that and shed a tear. I think Georgia Tech's trenches, offensively and defensively, and their recruiting in the past couple of years to get bigger has made a big difference for them. They're larger, they're stronger, they're able to get first downs on 3rd and short or down by the goal line, and they're able to stop people a little more efficiently. Unfortunately, I don't think that Miami plays into that. They want to get the ball to the outside. Let's look at a couple of examples. Cam Ward, he completes 2 out of 3 passes. 67% for him, 3,146 yards, 29 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. His quarterback rating, 91.7, is not just a radio frequency. It's number 1 in the nation. Damian Martinez, their leading rusher, has 595 yards. That's respectable. He averages 5.7 per carry. He's got 8 rushing touchdowns. The team has 23, so I'm not surprised with that number. After what I just said, though, that is a little bit of a difference maker. I thought they would have a lot more touchdowns in the air. They do have 31, but 23 on the ground. That means that they can punch it in when they get in the red zone when they need to. Xavier Restempro, he's their leading wide receiver, 51 catches for him, 16.8 yards every time he touches the ball, 9 touchdowns for that young man. So you mentioned something, Logan, that's of interest. Their scoring is number 2 in the nation, but their defense, they give up 22 points a game. That's 52nd in the nation. That's kind of in the middle of the pack. So if Georgia Tech can keep it close, who knows what may happen late in the ball game. Georgia Tech, they scored 27 points a ball game. That's 74th, a little bit below average at the NCAA level. And they also give up 22 points a game. They're ranked right next to Miami in terms of their defenses. So should be a fantastic game. And if you get a chance to either go to it or to see it live before the Georgia game, you will not be disappointed. So those are the first 2 ones that relate to Georgia. Now let's get outside the state. When's the last time, Vincent, that we talked about Indiana being number 8, Indiana being number 8 in football, not basketball, and Indiana playing Michigan and being favorites for the first time since when? How long has it been since we've seen something like this?
Bloomington, Indiana. Growing up, what do we think about Indiana from an athletic standpoint, their programs? It was all
Bobby Knight and
basketball.
Hoosier basketball.
That's what I'm talking about. Ken Benson, Scott May, Butch Carter. We never even thought they even had a football program back in the day. An astounding stat that I'm going to lay out here today. They're playing Michigan. The last time they was favored in a football game over Michigan was almost 50-some years ago when I was 8 years old in 1968. That's how long the football program has not won at a high level. And what they've done this year, Kurt, don't want to butcher his name, Sengeti, is I'm saying that right, Harper?
You're doing the best job you can.
Okay. That guy right there.
He's amazing, isn't he? He's fantastic.
If that guy doesn't get Coach of the Year, some votes, I don't know what we're thinking of. The young man is out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I did some research. He's out of the same neighborhood as Dan Marino and John Calipari. Italian. And I'm going to tell you something, Mr. Kurt. I'm not going to butcher your last name. My respect goes up for you as a football coach. He won last year, James Madison. I think he brought, 12 to 13 players with him. He brought the quarterback, Curtis Roke, who's from Canada. Can I say Kent Dryden and Guy LaFleur? The hockey man. And Indiana's ranked number 8 in the country. And they've had some impressive wins this year. On the road against UCLA, 42 to 13. They beat Maryland 42-28. Then they beat Nebraska 56 to 7. We're talking about some serious programs here in football. And now I'm going to tell you something. They favored as a 2-touchdown favorite over Michigan on Saturday. Sharon Moore, I'm going to give you a pass this year. Y'all lost a lot from last year. 14, 15 players in the NFL draft. You lost your coach, Harbaugh. I'm not going to be mad at you, but you better make it respectable because this is an Indiana team that's flying real high. And this is a team not only that I can see winning the Big Ten championship, but also really making some noise in the college football playoffs. This is a really good football team under a very good football coach and a very confident coach. I remember after what they did in Nebraska, Mr. Kirk was on a post-game show afterwards. He said, I don't fear nobody. This is Indiana's football right now, and you better take us seriously. We're going to prove it on the field. And all I'm looking at, they ranked number 8 in the country in the college football rankings. They were beating some real good football teams in the Big Ten. And Indiana has never, ever been at this level, Harper. It's always been a basketball school. But I'm a big-time fan of them. And I like their running back, Justin Ellison, who transferred from Wake Forest. He's something serious. This is a very, very serious Indiana football team. Do you, Harper?
Well, you said it was decades since the last time that Indiana has been favored against Michigan in a football game. You mentioned something. I do the radio for Georgia State, and I've been a part of the James Madison involvement with the Sun Belt. And I remember going up there a couple years ago, and I'm looking at the bodies of these guys as I'm walking across, and they're all pretty stout kids. They're 6'1", they're 6'2", but they're not 6'5". They're kids that got overlooked to go to an SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12 school. They got overlooked because they were too small. They were good, but they weren't good enough. They weren't big enough. They weren't heavy enough. They missed it by the smallest of margins. And I think Kurt took the chip on their shoulder and turned it into an advantage. Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah? Let me show you something, guys. You're going to play the hardest football that you've ever played in your life, and you're going to love every minute of it while you're here at James Madison. And it worked because the guys responded. They worked around it in a way that they took advantage of it rather than it taking advantage of them. And I loved it. They played hard. They were undefeated going into last year's game against Appalachian State. College football game day was there on their campus, and it was fantastic. He does something different where he connects with the kids to where they believe in him. And that's the part that I think is exciting. And for the first time in decades, you're going to be a home favorite if you win this ball game and beat Michigan, because Michigan's down and they are beatable. I won't be surprised with that. This won't be an upset because Michigan just doesn't have it this year. If you had done the same thing last year, yes, that would be a surprise. But wait till Ohio State or Penn State later on in the schedule when those things open up for you. Real quick, what's impressed me the most? They average 46 points a game. That's number 3 in the country. We've already know who number 2 is. We talked about it, and that's Miami. They're just 1 point behind them. But their defense, they're only giving up 13 points a game. That, to me, is why they're where they are. They're able to do things defensively. It's not just a quarterback, running back, top receivers. They've got those. As a team, they've got 32 touchdowns on the ground. They've got 23 in the air. They have 5 receivers on their roster that have 20 catches or more. So Indiana is very impressive. So Memorial Stadium will be rocking at 3:30 on CBS. You can see for yourselves just how it is. Our next game will be, after a loss, Clemson will be going to Virginia Tech. The Hokies will be hosting them at 3:30 on ESPN. Your thoughts about this one?
Dabo. We were saying Clemson was going to have the lane wide open and just go through the ACC. We was looking at them last week. I was, as a serious college football playoff team, and maybe even could get a 4th seed. But what really disappointed me last week, Isaac Brown, the running back from Louisville, had over 151 yards rushing. Louisville was able to run the football on them. And with Clemson got 2 D tackles that's got NFL talent and Pete Woods and DeMonte Capehart, that was disappointing in how Clemson struggled offensively. You're going up to the Virginia Tech, who lost to Syracuse 38-31. That's a good football team under Brent Pryor. And you better understand this. They 5-4 on the year. They had Miami on the ropes. Remember that pass in the end zone could have went the other way, and they could have a win over Miami. And they got a running back in Jeremiah Coney, who last week had 9 carries for 96 yards. What hurt Clemson last week? As I just mentioned, Mr. Isaac Brown from Louisville had 151 yards on him. And to be honest, Louisville dominated on the line of scrimmage on both sides. Back to you, Harper.
Well, it's been a while since Clemson has lost twice in the same season. The way that they have this year. They're 6-2. They're 5-1 in the conference. Cade Klubnik, 65% completion, 2,064 yards, 21 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. So he's been impressive. Phil Moffas is the leading rusher there for the team, 853 yards for that young man, 8 touchdowns. He averages 5.4 yards a carry. They are 22nd is Clemson in passing. They're 22nd in rushing the ball. They're in the top 10 in scoring. They average 39 points a ball game. Their defense has been a little suspect this year. They're averaging 24 points. That's 67th in the nation. That's about average, right, compared to the 34 teams that are there. On paper, they are better than Virginia Tech, but let's see what happens. Virginia Tech can rush the ball now. They average 201 yards a game. They get about 31 points. So on paper, this should be a 7, maybe a 10-point win for Clemson. But when you go to Hokies and you listen to Enter Sandman, lots of crazy things can happen. So let's see how that one turns out. In terms of things that we haven't said in a long time, Vincent, when's the last time you said Army is 8-0? They're undefeated in their conference, and they go against North Texas and the Mean Green, who is 5-3 and 2-2. That game will be at 3:30 on ESPN2.
Put respect on Jeff Monken's name. The head coach at Army, 8-0. Bryson Daly, their quarterback, is a player. Casey Reynolds is one of the top wide receivers in the country. And their defense is playing at a high level. I'm going to let you give a stat of how good their defense is, Harper. But all I can say is they're playing North Texas State, which is a team that throws the football a lot. They got a good football player in Chandler Morris, who's at TCU last year. So this is going to be a football game that Army, I expect, is going to show the country that they're going to go into Denton, Texas. The Mean Green, Joe Green is not coming through the door. They're going to really, really put it on North Texas. And I'm going to say this. It's been a really good football season because both of the Naval Academies are winning at a high level, Navy and Army. like I said, and I'm going to repeat myself, let's put some respect on Jeff Monken's name, the head coach at Army. And when you think about Army, you got to think about Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside. Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis, 1944, baby. The Army, the cadets. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, it's been a while. Gosh, my dad was a kid back when those guys were playing. Well, Bryson Daly, if he ever gets tired or has to take a play off, I don't know what Army's going to do, because passing the ball, he's got 629 yards, and that's not very impressive. You know, they average 93 yards a game. That's number 134. That's about dead bottom in the country. But they don't care. They still have 7 touchdowns and no interceptions. Think about that. Normal Army, a Georgia Tech or Georgia Southern, wishbone, wing T type offense, triple option. You see a guy that doesn't know how to throw the ball very well, and he'll have 7 touchdowns, but he'll have 5 picks. Not so with Army, 0. But Daly also has 6.6 yards every time he scrambles and runs. Not just from when he's leaving the pocket, but when they run that option, he's able to keep it. He's got 10 touchdowns on the ground as well. Kanye Uda, he is their leading receiver, is 791 yards. He's got 9 touchdowns. So a lot of different things that Army does successfully. They don't pass for beans. We know that. They're the leading rusher in the country. They average 340 yards on the ground. They score 39 points a ball game. That's 9, and their defense only gives up 11. That's the part, Vincent, that to me, I agree with you. That's going to be a difference maker. North Texas State, they can score too. They average 40 points a game. That's 6th in the country. I had no idea until I looked it up. Wait a second. North Texas is number 6 in the country. They sure stinking are. But they're 128th on defense. They average 36 points a game that they give up. So I think Army will score at will. It's just a matter of whether North Texas will be able to match them, and possessions will be a key to this ball game. What do you do with every one of your possessions? And that will also carry us into this next game that we have, where this is about as big as you can get in the SEC, at least on the west side. Number 11, University of Alabama, heads to Baton Rouge. They're 6-2 is Alabama. They're 3-2 in the conference. The number 15 ranked LSU Tigers, they're 6-2 overall. They've only got 1 loss in SEC play. They're 3-1 overall. Tiger Stadium's will be rocking at 7:30 at night. Oh my goodness! Could you imagine anything better?
Harper, you've been in the stadium, correct, on a Saturday night. So, and I have a sister that lives in Slidell, Louisiana. I've been to Baton Rouge, but I've never been to a football game. That's on my bucket list before I leave the earth. But when you talk about an atmosphere, 2 programs, electric. You're talking about alcohol in the air. You can smell it. And you're talking about 2 coaches. Let's be honest. What coach loses this game? You're talking about the hot seat. It's going to be like fire, like the Ohio players when they had that song, Fire.
Bum, 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 bum.
Don't. Okay. I'm going to start with Alabama. Kind of a weird dynamic at how the season just went. After the Georgia game, everybody was loving Caleb DeBoer. There was people out of Sweet Home Alabama was saying national championship. There was people saying the ship is not going to stop. Jalen Milroe, after that football game, hands down, he's the number 1 candidate for the Heisman Trophy. They was talking about the sensational freshman Ryan Williams. But how things have changed. The loss to Vanderbilt and then the loss to Tennessee. It's going to be real critical how Alabama's going to play in this football game. The pressure is going to be on Coach DeBoer. Then you're looking at the other side, the LSU Tigers. Let's be honest, Brian Kelly, I was not really excited when LSU hired him as the head coach at Notre Dame, because when he was at Notre Dame, he was still underachieving. Think about the offensive talent that he's had, Harper. Look what Jaden Daniels is doing in the NFL. Look at what Malik Neighbors is doing in the NFL. Look what Brian Thomas is doing in the NFL. And then look what Garrett Nussmeier has done for him this season. And I watched him 2 weeks ago against Texas A&M. And what upsets me the most You got all that talent. And then your defense is playing real well. They got a kid named Brady Swinson that's from where I'm living at right now, Douglasville, Georgia, by way of Chapel Hill High School, that has 8 sacks on the year. That's an NFL talent. And that game gets away from you because your special teams is poor. The snapper don't handle the kick. You missed 2 field goals in that game. And we wouldn't even be talking about you being ranked 14th or 15th in the country right now. That's what frustrates me about LSU, and that's why their fan base is frustrated. But you know what? This is an elimination game. Whatever team loses this football game on Saturday night, Audio Misco, baby. So you got national television. You got my man Kurt Herbstreit is going to be there. It's going to be crazy. It's going to go back to the days of Billy Cannon, his great run on Halloween in 59. Boy, you got Burt Jones in the past, the Brad Davis in 72 against Ole Miss. It's going to be something else down there in Baton Rouge. And the game is going to be, I think, the most game that's going to be the most serious because we got 2 programs. Whichever team loses this football game, the fan base is going to be crazy on Monday morning. Back to you, Harper.
Well, I know LSU travels well when they play at Bama. At least they have in the past. Remember visiting with some of the locals. They said there were 100,000 people in the stadium and there were about 200,000 outside. And most of them had crossed over the border from Louisiana. They just wanted to say they were there. They weren't inside. They didn't have a ticket, but they were there. I'm wondering if Alabama is going to travel well. I know they packed the place at Vanderbilt, but I don't know how many tickets they're going to have to be able to get to this one. This is a game that you circle on your calendar as soon as it appears on the schedule, whether you're a coach, whether you're a player, whether you're a fan. This is the big game, at least on the SEC West side, that all the marbles are in place for that. You win this game, you should be in position to win the conference and get yourself into the playoffs. So I think that still has a tremendous side effect to it as well. For this game as well. The winner of this game still is relevant. So that's where you want to be. All right, last game that we're going to look at, we're going to go to Utah. We're going to talk about the Holy War. The 4-4 Utah Utes will be hosting the BYU Cougars. BYU is 8-0. We haven't talked about it much this year. So that's why I want to take a minute just to go over this Cougar program and leading their conference. And obviously with an undefeated record, they can play ball. Real quick, Vincent, let's look at just a couple of the numbers. Jake Ratzliff is their quarterback, 241 yards in the air. That's 59th. 168 yards on the ground. That's 59th. They score 35 points a game. That's about 25th in the nation. There are 19 points that they give up. That's in the top 25. Not much. On paper, they're okay, but when they play together, they're unbeatable.
Hey, you got to give respect to BYU, man. You got to go all the way back to their years up to now. 8-0 in the newly reformed Big 12. What more can you say? They're one of the most, unsung teams that nobody's talking about right now. And I like their defense, man. When you are a team and you know when you're good is when your defense is playing at a high level. They got 13 quarterback sacks, but I like what they're doing. And they got a real good football player at the cornerback position, Jacob Robinson. Remember that name. He's one of the top corners in the country. Much respect to BYU, man. I mean, you got to think the history. And when we look at college football fans over the course of the history, a lot of people are saying, well, I don't know about BYU because they play out there and their offense has been always offensively back in the days of Lavelle Edwards. But when you look at it, it should not be no surprise when you look at the history and the players that came out of that school. McMahon, Bosco, Young. This is a team that won the national championship in 1985, and they're doing their work quietly. They beat a good they beat a UCF team last week, Central Florida. At Central Florida 2 weeks ago, 37-24. That right there caught my eye. This is a team that they're going to move along, look like they're going to be the team coming out of Big 12. And I tell you what, if I'm in the college football playoffs, I don't want to see you because this is a good football team, man. Looking at Utah, 4-4 on the year. And the thing I can say this about Kyle Winningham, I still think he's a good football coach at a high level. Remember this, a lot of people don't understand this. When Mark Richt stepped down and was let go, did you know Kyle Whittingham was at the top of the Georgia list before Kirby Smart? He turned the job down because he wanted to stay in Utah. But I'm going to tell you this, what's really separated that football team is that they haven't had their quarterback, Cameron Rising. He is a very good football player. He's been there a long time, forever. I think he's a 7-year player. But think about it. When he's under center, Utah is a pretty damn good football team. And he's gotten hurt, the year, and it don't look like he's going to come back. Isaac Wilson has struggled at the position. Zach Wilson's little brother. But this is still a football team at 4-4. Still got some good players. Landon Barton, who we talked about in our NFL draft prospects, is still the high-rated top linebacker in the 2025 NFL draft. Dorian Singer is a very good football player at the wide receiver spot. So even though Utah is 4-4, I wouldn't be surprised they play BYU to the vest. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, it should be a great game. And obviously the Holy War, it's a big one in Utah. You get bragging rights, but also it helps with recruiting. Both coaches hope that this turns out to be a victory for themselves so that they can use that to their advantage to bring in the new guys, the freshmen, transfers, and obviously the portal kids that would be impressed and want to play there. If BYU does win this game and they end up hosting a game for the playoff, wouldn't it be interesting? Because the altitude there obviously is a factor. There are teams that play at sea level or pretty dang close to it, and you go up to 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet where the Cougar Stadium is. That's a difference maker. So obviously a lot of things in play right there. Well, we wanted to bring you some of the games that we think are going to be interesting. We've obviously talked about them enough. Now you get a chance to have your own discussion and get to watch them here this weekend. We hope that you have a great time. Last word, Vincent, before we head out.
Kudos to the Indiana Hoosiers. What they're doing up there in Bloomington is unreal. Being ranked number 8 in the college football playoffs, I'm going to call his name, Mr. Kirk. I'm not going to butcher your last name. You got it going on up there in Bloomington, man. That's a real good football team. And I wouldn't be surprised if they end up if they make the college football playoffs, they're going a long way toward getting that coveted crown as a national champion. That is a serious football team, man.
Yep. Well, we get to see them and many others. Georgia's playing, Georgia Tech at home, and obviously the ones that we mentioned as well. So we hope that you have a wonderful weekend tuning in yourself to watch the college football action. We chose 7 to talk about ourselves. That's what we do here. So on behalf of Logan Landers, our engineer and co-host, you got to talk about a couple of the games yourself, Logan. For Vincent Turner and I'm Harper LeBel, we want to thank you for tuning in to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. This is the College Football Super 7 edition. Have a great day, everybody.